We are zeroing in on things that might change under a new Trump administration. The former president has promised to reinstate a ban on military service for transgender people and to block transition-related care for minors nationwide.
Donald Trump has won the U.S. election. What are his plans for a second term in office? And what's next for Kamala Harris? 4 ways Donald Trump's election was historic. Donald Trump's election victory was history-making in several respects, even as his defeat of Vice President Kamala Harris prevented other firsts. She would have been the nation's first Black and South Asian woman to be president. He's the oldest to be elected. At 78, Trump is the oldest person elected to the U.S. presidency. When sworn in on January 20, 2025, he will be a few months older than Joe Biden was at his inauguration in 2020. Trump's running mate, 40-year-old J.D. Vance, will be the 3rd youngest vice president. It's the 2nd time someone has won 2 non-consecutive terms. Several U.S. presidents have served more than 1 term, and Trump joins the group. He was the 45th president, and now will be the 47th. But only one other president did it the way Trump will, with a gap between terms. That was Grover Cleveland, who served as the 22nd president after the 1884 election and as the 24th president after the campaign of 1892. He's been convicted of felony crimes. Trump is in line to become the first U.S. president with a felony conviction. In May, New York jury found him guilty of all 34 charges in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election through a hush money payment to a porn actor who said the two had sex. North Carolina Democrats find electoral success further down the ballot and hope to build on it. He's been impeached twice. Trump already is the only president in U.S. history to face impeachment proceedings twice while in office. In each case, he was acquitted by the Senate on all counts. What to expect in Oregon on Election Day? The presidential election and the race for control of the closely divided U.S. House are expected to dominate attention in Oregon on election night on November 5. Voters will also decide a ballot measure to establish ranked choice voting. At the top of the ballot, Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris and Republican former President Donald Trump will compete for Oregon's 8 electoral votes. The state had one of the closest vote margins in the 2000 presidential election, but was overshadowed by the Florida recount. Since then, Oregon has moved sharply towards Democratic candidates in presidential elections, so much so that neither ticket has stepped foot in the state since becoming their party's nominees. In the U.S. House, Republican incumbent Lori Chavez DeRemer faces a tough re-election bid for a 2nd term in a district where voters preferred President Joe Biden over Trump by almost 10 percentage points in 2020. The Democratic nominee is Janelle Bynum, a state representative. 3 third-party or independent candidates are also on the ballot. Chavez DeRemer was first elected in 2022 by a 51%-49% margin. Republicans are targeting 2 first-term incumbents in Democratic-leaning districts covering the Salem and Eugene areas. Both Reps Val Hoyle and Andrea Salinas won their seats in 2022 with a fraction more than 50% of the vote, although Hoyle enjoyed an 8-point margin of victory over her Republican opponent. Biden carried both Hoyle's 4th district and Salinas' 6th district with 55% of the vote. Voters will also consider Measure 117, which would establish ranked choice voting. If passed, the measure would represent a significant shift in Oregon's voting system. It's one of 5 statewide questions on the ballot. What to know about Trump's 2nd term? Staffing the administration. Here are the people Trump has picked for key positions so far. Plus, a look at recess appointments and how could Trump use them to fill his cabinet. Follow all of our coverage as Donald Trump assembles his 2nd administration. Voters are also casting ballots for Portland mayor and the city's new 12-member city council. Oregon's first reports typically focus on votes cast before Election Day, as the state primarily uses mail-in ballots. Oregon allows ballots postmarked by Election Day to be counted if they arrive up to 7 days later. This means initial results can shift as later ballots are processed. Key areas to watch include Clackamas and Deschutes counties, which are often pivotal in close races. Ballots were mailed out starting October 16. Donald Trump has promised sweeping action in a second administration. The former president and now president-elect often skipped over details, but through more than a year of policy pronouncements and written statements outlined a wide-ranging agenda that blends traditional conservative approaches to taxes, regulation, and cultural issues with a more populist bent on trade and a shift in America's international role. Trump's agenda also would scale back federal government efforts on civil rights and expand presidential powers. A look at what Trump has proposed. Immigration. Build the wall. From his 2016 campaign has become creating the largest mass deportation program in history. Trump has called for using the National Guard and empowering domestic police forces in the effort. Still, Trump has been scant on details of what the program would look like and how he would ensure that it targeted only people in the U.S. illegally. He's pitched ideological screening for would-be entrants, ending birthright citizenship, which almost certainly would require a constitutional change, and said he'd reinstitute first-term policies, such as Remain in Mexico, limiting migrants on public health grounds, and severely limiting or banning entrants from certain majority Muslim nations. Altogether, the approach would not just crack down on illegal migration, but curtail immigration overall. Abortion. Trump played down abortion as a second-term priority, even as he took credit for the Supreme Court ending a woman's federal right to terminate a pregnancy and returning abortion regulation to state governments. At Trump's insistence, the GOP platform, for the first time in decades, did not call for a national ban on abortion. Trump maintains that overturning Roe v. Wade is enough on the federal level. Trump said last month on his social media platform, Truth Social, that he would veto a federal abortion ban if legislation reached his desk, a statement he made only after avoiding a firm position in his September debate against Democratic nominee Kamala Harris. But it's unclear if his administration would aggressively defend against legal challenges seeking to restrict access to abortion pills, including mifepristone, as the Biden administration has. Anti-abortion advocates continue to wage legal battles over the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the drug, as well as the agency's relaxed prescribing restrictions. Trump is also unlikely to enforce Biden's guidance that hospitals must provide abortions for women who are in medical emergencies, even in states with bans. Taxes. Trump's tax policies broadly tilt toward corporations and wealthier Americans. That's mostly due to his promise to extend his 2017 tax overhaul, with a few notable changes that include lowering the corporate income tax rate to 15% from the current 21%. That also involves rolling back Democratic President Joe Biden's income tax hikes on the wealthiest Americans and scrapping Inflation Reduction Act levies that finance energy measures intended to combat climate change. Those policies notwithstanding, Trump has put more emphasis on new proposals aimed at working and middle-class Americans, exempting earned tips, Social Security wages, and overtime wages from income taxes. It's noteworthy, however, that his proposal on tips, depending on how Congress might write it, could give a backdoor tax break to top wage earners by allowing them to reclassify some of their pay as tip income, a prospect that at its most extreme could see hedge fund managers or top-flight attorneys taking advantage of a policy that Trump frames as being designed for restaurant servers, bartenders, and other service workers. Tariffs and trade. Trump's posture on international trade is to distrust world markets as harmful to American interests. He proposes tariffs of 10% to 20% on foreign goods, and in some speeches has mentioned even higher percentages. He promises to reinstitute an August 2020 executive order requiring that the federal government buy essential medications only from U.S. companies. He pledges to block purchases of any vital infrastructure in the U.S. by Chinese buyers. DEI, LGBTQ, and civil rights. Trump has called for rolling back societal emphasis on diversity and for legal protections for LGBTQ citizens. Trump has called for ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in government institutions, using federal funding as leverage. On transgender rights, Trump promises generally to end boys' and girls' sports, a practice he insists, without evidence, is widespread. But his policies go well beyond standard applause lines from his rally speeches. Among other ideas, Trump would roll back the Biden administration's policy of extending Title IX civil rights protections to transgender students, and he would ask Congress to require that only two genders can be recognized at birth. Regulation, federal bureaucracy, and presidential power. The president-elect seeks to reduce the role of federal bureaucrats and regulations across economic sectors. Trump frames all regulatory cuts as an economic magic wand. He pledges precipitous drops in U.S. households' utility bills by removing obstacles to fossil fuel production, including opening all federal lands for exploration, even though U.S. energy production is already at record highs. Trump promises to unleash housing construction by cutting regulations, though most construction rules come from state and local government. He also says he would end frivolous litigation from the environmental extremists. The approach would in many ways strengthen executive branch influence. That power would come more directly from the White House. He would make it easier to fire federal workers by classifying thousands of them as being outside civil service protections. That could weaken the government's power to enforce statutes and rules by reducing the number of employees engaging in the work and potentially impose a chilling effect on those who remain. Trump also claims that presidents have exclusive power to control federal spending even after Congress has appropriated money. Trump argues that lawmakers' budget actions set a ceiling on spending but not a floor, meaning the president's constitutional duty to faithfully execute the laws includes discretion on whether to spend the money. This interpretation could set up a court battle with Congress. As a candidate, he also suggested that the Federal Reserve, an independent entity that sets interest rates, should be subject to more presidential power. Though he has not offered details, any such move would represent a momentous change to how the U.S. economic and monetary systems work. Education. The Federal Department of Education would be targeted for elimination in a second Trump administration. That does not mean that Trump wants Washington out of classrooms. He still proposes, among other maneuvers, using federal funding as leverage to pressure K-12 school systems to abolish tenure and adopt merit pay for teachers, and to scrap diversity programs at all levels of education. He calls for pulling federal funding for any school or program pushing critical race theory, gender ideology, or other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. In higher education, Trump proposes taking over accreditation processes for colleges, a move he describes as his secret weapon against the Marxist maniacs and lunatics he says control higher education. Trump takes aim at higher education endowments, saying he will collect billions and billions of dollars from schools via taxing, fining, and suing excessively large private university endowments at schools that do not comply with his edicts. That almost certainly would end up in protracted legal fights. As in other policy areas, Trump isn't actually proposing limiting federal power in higher education but strengthening it. He calls for redirecting the confiscated endowment money into an online American Academy, offering college credentials to all Americans without tuition charges. It will be strictly non-political, and there will be no wokeness or jihadism allowed. None of that's going to be allowed, Trump said on November 1, 2023. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Trump insists he would protect Social Security and Medicare, popular programs geared toward older Americans, and among the biggest pieces of the federal spending pie each year. There are questions about how his proposal not to tax tip and overtime wages might affect Social Security and Medicare. If such plans eventually involved only income taxes, the entitlement programs would not be affected. But exempting those wages from payroll taxes would reduce the funding stream for Social Security and Medicare outlays. Trump has talked little about Medicaid during this campaign, but his first administration reshaped the program by allowing states to introduce work requirements for recipients. Affordable Care Act, and health care. As he has since 2015, Trump calls for repealing the Affordable Care Act and its subsidized health insurance marketplaces. But he still has not proposed a replacement. In a September debate, he insisted he had the concepts of a plan. In the latter stages of the campaign, Trump played up his alliance with former presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a longtime critic of vaccines and of pesticides used in U.S. agriculture. Trump repeatedly told rally crowds that he would put Kennedy in charge of making America healthy again. Climate and energy. Trump, who claims falsely that climate change is a hoax, blasts Biden-era spending on cleaner energy designed to reduce U.S. reliance on fossil fuels. He proposes an energy policy and transportation infrastructure spending anchored to fossil fuels, roads, bridges, and combustion engine vehicles. Drill, baby, drill was a regular chant at Trump rallies. Trump says he does not oppose electric vehicles, but promises to end all Biden incentives to encourage EV market development. Trump also pledges to roll back Biden-era fuel efficiency standards. Workers' rights. Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance framed their ticket as favoring America's workers. But Trump could make it harder for workers to unionize. In discussing auto workers, Trump focused almost exclusively on Biden's push toward electric vehicles. When he mentioned unions, it was often to lump the union bosses and CEOs together as complicit in this disastrous electric car scheme. In an October 23, 2023 statement, Trump said of United Auto Workers, "I'm telling you, you shouldn't pay those dues." National defense and America's role in the world. Trump's rhetoric and policy approach in world affairs is more isolationist diplomatically, non-interventionist militarily, and protectionist economically than the U.S. has been since World War I. But the details are more complicated. He pledges expansion of the military, promises to protect Pentagon spending from austerity efforts, and proposes a new missile defense shield. An old idea from the Reagan era during the Cold War. Trump insists he can end Russia's war in Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war without explaining how. Trump summarizes his approach through another Reagan phrase, peace through strength, but he remains critical of NATO and top U.S. military brass. "I don't consider them leaders," Trump said of Pentagon officials that Americans see on television. He repeatedly praised authoritarians like Hungary's Viktor Orban and Russia's Vladimir Putin. What's next for Kamala Harris? Here are 6 options. In 74 days, Vice President Kamala Harris will leave office, with no concrete plans about what to do next or how to proceed as a private citizen for the first time since she was elected San Francisco's district attorney in 2003. Her friends, aides, and political allies have said in the hours since her loss to former President Donald J. Trump that it is too soon to even contemplate, let alone plan, the next phase of her life, except to say that the 60-year-old Ms. Harris will have plenty of options. Like the defeated presidential nominees who came before her, Ms. Harris is experiencing incredible political whiplash. On Tuesday morning, she was the leader of the Democratic Party and widely seen as its future. By Thursday, officials were privately saying they expected her to remain engaged, but assumed the party would want to move on from the Biden era as soon as possible. "I believe that she is more respected than ever within our party," said Lieutenant Gov. Eleni Kaunalakis of California, a longtime Harris ally. "I think the question really is, what does she want to do? Right now, I'm sure she is simply trying to process, but I have no doubt that she will have an answer to this in the coming months." Here are 6 options for Ms. Harris as she contemplates her post-vice presidency. Write a book. There will be no shortage of publishers interested in selling Ms. Harris's thoughts about her experience in the Biden administration and running against Mr. Trump. Hillary Clinton wrote a book titled What Happened After Mr. Trump Beat Her in 2016. Mr. Gore plunged into environmental advocacy and produced the documentary film, An Inconvenient Truth. How candid Ms. Harris might be about her feelings would probably be indirectly proportional to her interest in seeking public office again. But there will be enormous public interest in what she really thought about serving with an aging president and losing an election to a man she described as a fascist threat to democracy. Practice self-care and go for a hike. About the only clue regarding Ms. Harris's post-election plans is her apparent desire to spend more time with food not eaten on a campaign plane. "I plan on putting on some pounds after this is over," she said on October 27 in Pennsylvania at a bookstore in Pennsylvania. "They're working me to the bone." She could also emulate Mrs. Clinton. Days after she lost to Mr. Trump in 2016, the former Secretary of State was spotted by a fellow hiker on a trail outside her home in Chappaqua. NY Bill Clinton took a photo that the woman subsequently shared on Facebook, where it went viral. Ms. Harris still has 10 weeks left to reside in the Naval Observatory, the grounds of which are not known for good hiking. But Rock Creek Park in Washington is nearby, with miles of pretty trails for the vice president or her supporters to relieve their post-election stress on foot. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed our video, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to our channel for more content. See you next time.